The recruitment station buzzed with nervous energy as hundreds of young humans lined up for their mandatory military assessment. Among them stood Elena Vasquez, a small woman with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. While others chatted excitedly about their hopes for prestigious assignments, Elena remained silent, her eyes observing everything around her with quiet intensity. The Galactic Defense Force had opened its doors to humanity only 3 years ago, after Earth's surprise victory against the Krellian raiders. Most alien species viewed humans as unpredictable wildcards, too emotional, too reckless, too willing to sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts like honor and freedom. The recruitment process was designed to weed out the unstable ones and find humans who could integrate into the disciplined, logical structure of galactic military doctrine. Elena watched as her fellow recruits were called forward one by one. The testing booth hummed with alien technology that could measure everything from reflexes to psychological stability. When Marcus Chen, a loud engineering student from her hometown, emerged from the booth with a satisfied grin and a yellow assignment badge, the crowd murmured appreciatively. Yellow meant technical corps, a respectable position that would keep him far from combat zones. Vasquez, Elena Maria, came the mechanical voice from the testing station. She walked forward without fanfare, ignoring the whispered comments about her unremarkable appearance. Inside the booth, sensors swept over her body, while holographic displays tested her coordination and problem-solving abilities. The questions came rapid-fire: tactical scenarios, moral dilemmas, mathematical puzzles. Elena answered each one calmly, her voice steady despite the pressure. When she emerged 20 minutes later, the assignment computer seemed to hesitate before dispensing her badge. The recruiter, a blue-scaled Vorthak, examined the result with obvious confusion. Instead of the expected green badge for standard infantry or yellow for support roles, Elena held a gray badge. Gray was reserved for unassigned personnel, soldiers whose test results were too unusual to categorize immediately. Report to Sergeant Morrison at Camp Taurus for advanced evaluation, the Vorthak said, his translator rendering his clicks and hisses into flat, emotionless words. Elena nodded and stepped aside, slipping the badge into her pocket. Around her, other recruits stared with mixtures of curiosity and pity. Gray badges were rare, and most people assumed they meant rejection was coming. Elena didn't correct their assumptions. She had learned long ago that being underestimated was often an advantage. The transport to Camp Taurus was a converted cargo hauler that reeked of fuel and stale air. Elena found a seat in the back corner and watched the landscape blur past through a scratched porthole. The camp sat on a barren moon orbiting the gas giant Kepler 442b, where the lower gravity and harsh conditions made it ideal for testing soldiers' adaptability. As the shuttle touched down, Elena could see the sprawling complex of training facilities spread across the crater-marked surface. Obstacle courses, firing ranges, and simulation chambers stretched to the horizon, under the reddish glow of the giant planet above. Other shuttles were arriving, disgorging recruits from dozens of different worlds. Humans, yes, but also the towering Kazakh warriors, the insectoid Thrix soldiers, and even a few of the enigmatic energy beings called lumens. Sergeant Morrison stood waiting at the landing pad, his weathered face showing the scars of decades in military service. He was pure human, one of the veterans who had earned respect through the Krellian War. His gray hair was cropped short, and his uniform was perfectly pressed despite the morning heat. "All right, you gray badges, listen up," he barked as Elena and 17 other confused recruits gathered around him. "You're here because the computers couldn't figure out what to do with you. That could mean you're special, or it could mean you're defective. The next 6 weeks will determine which one." Elena studied her fellow gray badges as Morrison continued his speech. Most looked nervous or angry about their uncertain status. A few seemed cocky, convinced they were destined for elite units. Elena felt neither emotion. She was here to serve regardless of the assignment, and she would do whatever was necessary to succeed. "This is not standard basic training," Morrison continued. "You'll be tested in scenarios that regular recruits never see. You'll face challenges designed to break you down and rebuild you into something the galaxy needs. Some of you will wash out in the first week. Some of you will discover abilities you never knew you had." He paused, scanning their faces with sharp eyes. When his gaze fell on Elena, she met it steadily without flinching. Something flickered in the sergeant's expression. Not quite recognition, but interest. Your barracks assignments are on your tablets. Chow is at 0600, 1200, and 1800. Training begins at dawn tomorrow. Get some sleep, you're going to need it. As the group dispersed, Elena made her way to the indicated barracks building. Her assigned room was spartanly furnished with 2 bunks, 2 lockers, and a small desk. Her roommate was already there, a nervous-looking girl named Katie from one of the agricultural colonies. Katie chattered nervously about the journey and her fears about the training, but Elena only half listened. Through the narrow window, she could see other training groups running through their exercises in the distance. Veterans moved among the recruits, correcting form and shouting encouragement. The whole scene had a familiar rhythm to it, like a machine designed to transform raw material into useful components. Elena had always been good at seeing patterns others missed, at finding the hidden connections that revealed the true nature of complex systems. As she unpacked her few belongings and prepared for the challenges ahead, she wondered what pattern the Gray Badge program was designed to reveal. Whatever it was, she would master it. She always did. That night, as Katie's breathing settled into the slow rhythm of sleep, Elena lay awake staring at the alien constellations visible through the window. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of her capabilities. She was ready for whatever they had planned, though she suspected they weren't ready for her. Dawn came early on Kepler 442b, the red giant's light filtering through the atmospheric processors and casting everything in shades of crimson and gold. Elena was already dressed and ready when the wake-up klaxon sounded, having learned long ago that preparation prevented panic. Katie stumbled around their small room, muttering complaints about the early hour as she struggled into her training uniform. The mess hall buzzed with dozens of conversations in multiple languages as recruits from various programs gathered for their morning meal. Elena took her standard protein rations and found an empty table near the back wall where she could observe the room's dynamics. The regular infantry recruits sat in large, boisterous groups, while the technical specialists huddled over data tablets. Her fellow Gray Badges scattered themselves randomly, most looking uncomfortable with their undefined status. Sergeant Morrison appeared at the front of the hall precisely at 0650, his presence commanding immediate silence. Gray Badge Squad, with me. Everyone else continue with your regularly scheduled disappointment. Elena followed the group outside where the morning air carried the metallic tang of processed atmosphere and distant machinery. Morrison led them to a training ground she hadn't seen from her window, a sprawling complex of interconnected obstacles that seemed to shift and reconfigure themselves as they watched. Holographic barriers flickered in and out of existence while mechanical platforms rose and fell in complex patterns. "This is the Nexus," Morrison announced, gesturing toward the ever-changing maze. "It's designed to test adaptability, spatial reasoning, and tactical thinking under pressure. Regular recruits get simplified versions of this course after 6 weeks of preparation. You get the full experience on day 1. Katie raised her hand tentatively. "Sergeant, what exactly are we supposed to do in there?" Morrison's smile was not particularly comforting. "Survive. Learn. Prove that your Gray Badge means something other than administrative confusion." He checked his chronometer. "You have 30 minutes to study the pattern. Then you go in, one at a time. Your performance will determine whether you continue with this program or get reassigned to kitchen duty on some remote monitoring station." Elena moved closer to the course entrance, her eyes tracking the movement of barriers and platforms. At first glance, the changes seemed random. Walls appearing and disappearing, floors shifting elevation, gaps opening and closing without apparent logic. But as she watched longer, subtle patterns began to emerge. The sequence wasn't truly random. It was following a complex algorithm designed to test specific skills at predetermined intervals. Other recruits muttered among themselves about the impossibility of the task, but Elena remained focused on the course. She began to see that the shifting elements worked in cycles, with certain configurations repeating every few minutes. More importantly, she noticed that the course responded to movement. Sensors tracked anyone who entered and adjusted the difficulty accordingly. "Vasquez, you're first," Morrison called out. Elena stepped forward without hesitation, ignoring the nervous whispers from her squad mates. At the entrance, she paused only long enough to confirm her analysis of the current cycle position. Then she moved. Her approach was unlike anything the observers had expected. Instead of charging forward aggressively or proceeding cautiously, Elena moved with fluid precision, timing her steps to coincide with the course's rhythm. When a barrier appeared in her path, she was already moving toward an alternate route. When the floor sections began to shift, her feet found stable ground as if she had known exactly when the change would occur. Morrison watched with growing interest as Elena navigated obstacles that had stymied veteran soldiers. She slipped through laser grids by understanding their timing, crossed unstable platforms by reading the mechanical indicators that predicted their movement, and solved kinetic puzzles by identifying the underlying mathematical relationships. Halfway through the course, Elena encountered a section that seemed impossible, a gap too wide to jump with no apparent crossing method. The platform on the far side was 15 feet away and 10 feet higher than her current position. Previous test subjects had spent precious minutes searching for hidden mechanisms or trying to stack movable objects into makeshift bridges. Elena stood at the edge for exactly 30 seconds, her eyes scanning not just the gap, but the entire surrounding structure. Then she stepped backward, picked up a small calibration weight from a nearby console, and threw it with remarkable precision at a sensor node 20 feet to her left. The node's impact triggered a maintenance sequence that caused a retractable bridge to extend across the gap. Elena crossed quickly, retrieved another weight from the far side, and used it to trigger the reset sequence that caused the bridge to extend again for the next person who might figure out the same solution. When she reached the finish line, Morrison's stopwatch read 14 minutes and 37 seconds. The previous record, set by a Kazakh Special Forces veteran, was 18 minutes and 12 seconds. Elena walked back to the group without fanfare, her breathing barely elevated from the exertion. Katie stared at her in amazement, while other recruits whispered among themselves about what they had just witnessed. "How did you do that?" asked Marcus, the engineering student from Elena's home colony, who had somehow ended up with a gray badge despite his initial yellow assignment. Elena considered her response carefully. "The course isn't random. It follows patterns, and the patterns exist for a reason. You just have to figure out what the designers were trying to test." Morrison nodded approvingly, though his expression remained neutral. "Interesting approach, Vasquez. Not what we typically see." He turned to the rest of the squad. "Johnson, you're next. Let's see if you learned anything from watching." As the next recruit stepped forward, Elena noticed Morrison discreetly speaking into his comm unit. She couldn't hear the words, but his tone suggested he was reporting her performance to someone higher in the command structure. That could be good or bad, depending on what they were looking for in their gray badge candidates. The rest of the squad struggled through the course with varying degrees of success. Katie managed to complete it in 28 minutes through sheer determination, while 2 recruits failed to finish within the 30-minute limit. Marcus used his engineering background to solve several mechanical puzzles, but struggled with the timing elements that Elena had made look effortless. By the end of the morning session, it was clear that Elena's performance had been exceptional, even by gray badge standards. But rather than feeling satisfied, she found herself wondering what new challenges would come next. In her experience, standing out too much in military training often led to unwanted attention and impossible expectations. That afternoon brought psychological evaluations and tactical simulations, but Elena approached each test with the same methodical precision she had shown on the Nexus course. She was beginning to understand that the Gray Badge program wasn't just about finding soldiers with unusual skills. It was about identifying individuals who could think and adapt in ways that conventional military doctrine didn't account for. As evening approached and the squad gathered for their debrief, Morrison studied each recruit with calculating eyes. When his gaze lingered on Elena, she maintained her neutral expression while internally preparing for whatever revelation was coming next. 3 weeks into the program, Elena had quietly established herself as the squad's most capable member, though she took care never to overshadow others unnecessarily. The Gray Badge recruits had been divided into smaller teams for advanced scenarios, and Elena found herself partnered with Marcus and 2 others for what Morrison called integration. exercises and combat simulations that mixed human recruits with alien soldiers from other species. The morning briefing took place in a sterile conference room where holographic displays showed the details of their assigned scenario. Their mission was to extract valuable intelligence from a mock enemy installation while working alongside a mixed unit that included 2 Kazakh heavy warriors, a Thrix scout, and a Lumen energy specialist. "This is where we separate the pretenders from the real prospects," Morrison explained as the aliens entered the briefing room. "Your fellow soldiers don't speak standard Galactic very well. They have completely different tactical doctrines, and they've been told that humans are unreliable partners who break under pressure." Elena studied their assigned teammates with professional interest. The Kazakhs were imposing figures, standing nearly 8 feet tall with thick armored skin and cybernetic implants that enhanced their already formidable strength. Their names were unpronounceable clusters of consonants, so they went by Tank and Boulder in standard. The Thrix scout, called Whisper, resembled a praying mantis crossed with a spider, with multiple limbs that could function as both weapons and tools. The Lumen, Flare, was the most alien of all, a being of pure energy contained within a specially designed environmental suit that made communication possible. Tank spoke first, his voice a low rumble that seemed to emerge from deep within his chest. "Humans small, humans weak, humans break when fighting gets real." His standard was heavily accented but clear enough to understand. Marcus bristled at the insult, but Elena placed a restraining hand on his arm. She had expected this kind of reception based on the briefing. Many alien species still viewed humanity as the galaxy's newcomers, brave enough in small doses but untested in real military operations. "We understand your concerns," Elena replied calmly. "Perhaps we can demonstrate our capabilities through performance rather than discussion." Whisper's multiple eyes focused on Elena with predatory intensity. The Thrix had acute pattern recognition abilities that made them excellent scouts and snipers. "This one is different," she clicked in her native language before switching to standard. "Small human speaks with confidence. Interesting. The mission scenario was complex enough to challenge any team. Infiltrate a fortified compound, locate and extract digital intelligence, then evacuate through hostile territory while avoiding detection. The simulated enemy forces would adapt their tactics based on the team's actions, making improvisation essential." Elena spent the planning phase listening rather than talking, absorbing details about each species' natural abilities and tactical preferences. The Kazakh favored direct assault supported by overwhelming firepower. The Thrix preferred stealth and precision strikes. The Lumen could manipulate energy fields and electronic systems in ways that seemed almost magical to other species. When Marcus suggested a frontal assault to draw attention while others infiltrated from behind, Tank nodded approvingly. When another recruit proposed a stealth approach using Thrix techniques, Whisper chirped her agreement. But Elena noticed that none of these plans effectively utilized all team members' strengths while accounting for their weaknesses. "May I suggest an alternative?" Elena asked quietly. Tank snorted dismissively. "Small human thinks she knows better than warriors with decades of experience? I think each of you brings unique capabilities that could be combined in ways that multiply our effectiveness, rather than simply adding it," Elena replied. "Tank, your strength and armor make you ideal for creating diversions, but you're also intelligent enough to time those diversions for maximum tactical advantage. Whisper, your stealth capabilities are impressive, but your pattern recognition skills could help coordinate the entire operation if you had Overwatch position. Flare, you can manipulate their electronic systems, but you could also create energy signatures that mimic larger forces and confuse their sensors." She continued outlining a plan that used each team member as both a specialist and a coordinator, creating redundancy and adaptability that purely role-based tactics couldn't achieve. The aliens listened with growing interest as she described how their individual strengths could be leveraged to cover other species' natural weaknesses. Boulder, who had remained silent during the initial introductions, finally spoke. "Human sees patterns others miss. This could work." The simulation itself unfolded like a perfectly choreographed dance. Elena's tactical coordination allowed each team member to operate at peak efficiency while maintaining situational awareness of the overall mission. When enemy patrols changed their routes unexpectedly, Whisper's overwatch position and pattern analysis provided early warning. When electronic countermeasures threatened to compromise their infiltration, Flare's energy manipulation capabilities turned enemy sensors against themselves. Most importantly, Elena demonstrated an ability that impressed even the veteran aliens. She could predict and counter enemy adaptations by thinking several moves ahead. When their initial penetration was detected sooner than expected, Elena immediately shifted to contingency plans that used the enemy's response patterns against them. The mission concluded with complete success and 0 casualties, a result that impressed even Morrison. As the team gathered for debriefing, the aliens' attitudes toward their human partners had noticeably changed. Human Vasquez thinks like Thrix, but with human unpredictability, Whisper observed. Very effective combination. Tank nodded his massive head. Humans may be small, but this one has warrior's mind. She sees whole battlefield, not just peace in front of her. Flare's translated voice carried undertones of curiosity. Energy patterns suggest deep analytical processing combined with intuitive leaps. Fascinating cognitive structure. Morrison watched these interactions with particular interest. After the aliens were dismissed, he approached Elena privately. You've impressed some very experienced soldiers today, Vasquez. That doesn't happen often with species who've been fighting wars since before humans discovered fire. Elena maintained her neutral expression. The mission parameters favored coordination over individual heroics. I simply tried to optimize our team's capabilities. Modesty noted, Morrison replied dryly. But what you did in there was more than just good coordination. You found ways to make other species feel valued, while subtly directing the entire operation. That's not a skill we can teach. He paused, studying her face for any sign of reaction. How would you feel about some additional responsibilities? There are other programs beyond gray badge training, opportunities for soldiers who show exceptional potential. Elena considered the question carefully. Additional responsibilities usually meant additional scrutiny, and she preferred to operate below the radar when possible. But she also recognized that her current position might not provide enough challenges to maintain her interest. What kind of responsibilities? She asked. Morrison smiled, and for the first time since she had met him, it seemed genuinely pleased rather than professionally neutral. The kind that might help determine humanity's role in galactic affairs. But we'll discuss that later. For now, get some rest. Tomorrow's exercises are going to be significantly more challenging. As Elena walked back to her barracks that evening, she reflected on the day's events. The aliens' acceptance had been gratifying, but Morrison's mysterious hints about additional opportunities were more concerning. In her experience, being singled out for special attention rarely ended well. Still, she was curious about what these new challenges might reveal about her own capabilities. Elena woke to find Katie's bunk empty and her belongings gone. According to the note left on Elena's desk, Katie had been reassigned to communications training after struggling with the more advanced tactical exercises. Elena wasn't surprised. Katie was intelligent and determined, but she lacked the specific cognitive flexibility that the Gray Badge program seemed to require. Her new roommate arrived that afternoon, Commander Sarah Chen, a veteran officer with 20 years of experience in special operations. Unlike the other recruits, Chen wore standard military insignia and carried herself with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command authority. Elena Vasquez, Chen said as she set down her equipment case. I've been reading your file. Interesting background for someone who's barely 22 years old. Elena had been expecting this conversation since Morrison's hints about additional responsibilities. Just a standard colonial education, ma'am. Nothing remarkable. Chen's smile suggested she knew better. Standard colonial education doesn't typically include advanced theoretical mathematics, multiple engineering disciplines, and what appears to be an intuitive understanding of complex systems analysis. Your instructor's notes indicate you were solving graduate-level problems by age 16. Elena maintained her neutral expression, while internally calculating how much information Chen might have access to. I enjoyed school. Math came easily. Math, engineering, psychology, history, military strategy, and apparently xenobiology, based on your performance with our alien allies yesterday. Chen continued. Either you're the most well-rounded accidental genius in human space, or someone has been very deliberately preparing you for this kind of work. The truth was more complicated than Chen's analysis suggested. But Elena had no intention of elaborating. Her unusual education had been the result of growing up in a research colony where her parents' academic colleagues had taken turns tutoring her in their respective specialties. What they hadn't known was that Elena possessed an unusually efficient memory and pattern recognition system that allowed her to absorb and integrate information at an accelerated rate. "I'm here to serve wherever I'm needed," Elena said. Simply, Chen nodded approvingly. "Good answer, because starting tomorrow you'll be participating in exercises that don't technically exist. The Gray Badge program is cover for something much more specific. We're identifying humans who can serve as cultural bridges and tactical coordinators in mixed species operations." Elena absorbed this information without visible reaction, though internally, she was recalculating the implications of her situation. Mixed species operations? "The galaxy is changing rapidly," Chen explained as she unpacked her gear. "Traditional military doctrine assumes each species fights according to their biological and cultural imperatives. But recent conflicts have shown that integrated teams can be exponentially more effective than segregated forces. The problem is finding individuals who can think flexibly enough to coordinate across species barriers." Chen activated a privacy field generator that would prevent their conversation from being monitored. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. 6 months ago, long-range scouts detected something moving in the void between galaxies, something big enough to register on gravitational sensors from a distance that should make detection impossible." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. "How big?" "Approximately the size of a small moon, traveling at speeds that suggest either exotic propulsion or something that's been accelerating for a very long time." Chen's expression was grim. "Analysis of its trajectory indicates it will reach the outer rim of our galaxy in approximately 18 months. The implications were staggering. Any civilization capable of building something that large and moving it across intergalactic distances was far beyond current galactic technological capabilities. Whether it represented a threat or an opportunity, humanity and its alien allies would need unprecedented levels of coordination to respond effectively. The Galactic Defense Council has authorized the formation of integrated response teams, small units, combining the best capabilities of each member species under unified command, Chen continued. But unified command requires commanders who can think beyond the limitations of any single species doctrine. Elena was beginning to understand her role in these plans. "You want human officers to command mixed species units. Not just any human officers," Chen corrected. "We need individuals who can earn the respect of species that view us as unpredictable newcomers, while demonstrating tactical capabilities that justify that respect. Your performance over the past 3 weeks suggests you might be one of those individuals." That night, Elena lay awake considering the full scope of what Chen had revealed. The Gray Badge program wasn't just advanced military training. It was preparation for a role that could determine humanity's position in galactic civilization. Success could establish humans as valued partners capable of leadership roles. Failure could confirm alien suspicions that humans were too young and unstable for serious responsibility. The next morning brought an entirely new type of exercise. Elena found herself in a command center simulation, surrounded by holographic displays showing tactical information about multiple ongoing scenarios. Her task was to coordinate the actions of several mixed species teams operating simultaneously across different mission parameters. The scenarios were deliberately complex and constantly changing. As Elena managed one team's infiltration mission, another team would encounter unexpected resistance requiring immediate tactical adjustments. Meanwhile, a third team might request support for an opportunity target that could significantly alter the strategic situation. What made the exercise particularly challenging was that each team was composed of different species combinations, requiring Elena to adjust her communication style and tactical approach based on the cognitive and cultural patterns of the troops she was directing. The Kazakh teams responded best to clear, direct orders with obvious logical justification. The Thrix teams needed detailed tactical briefings that allowed them to improvise within defined parameters. The Lumen teams required coordination suggestions rather than orders, since their distributed consciousness could process multiple tactical options. Simultaneously, Elena quickly realized that effective command in this Context required her to think like a conductor, leading a complex orchestra. Each section had its own rhythm and capabilities, but the overall performance depended on how well she could blend their individual strengths into something greater than the sum of its parts. As the exercise progressed, Elena found herself developing new tactical approaches that seemed to emerge naturally from the interaction between different species' capabilities. When a Kazakh team's frontal assault created an opening that a Thrix team could exploit, she coordinated their actions to achieve objectives that neither team could have accomplished alone. When lumen energy manipulation capabilities provided intelligence that changed the tactical picture, she redistributed other teams' assignments to capitalize on the new information. By the exercise's end, Elena had successfully coordinated 7 different mission objectives with 0 friendly casualties and minimal resource expenditure. More importantly, post-exercise debriefings indicated that the troops had felt confident in their leadership and understood how their individual contributions fitted into the larger tactical picture. Morrison and Chen observed the entire exercise from an adjacent control room, taking detailed notes about Elena's decision-making process and communication patterns. When Elena emerged from the simulation chamber, both officers were waiting with expressions that mixed satisfaction with concern. "Outstanding performance," Morrison said. "But now comes the real test." Chen nodded grimly. "Tomorrow you'll be commanding actual mixed-species units in live-fire exercises. No simulations, no safety protocols beyond basic medical support. If you make mistakes, people could die." The live-fire exercise took place in a section of the moon's surface that had been converted into a realistic combat environment. Ancient impact craters provided natural cover, while modular structures created an urban warfare scenario, complete with civilians, hostiles, and valuable targets that required precision to preserve. Elena stood in the mobile command center reviewing tactical displays while her mixed-species team prepared for insertion. This time her unit included veterans from 5 different species, Tank and Whisper from her previous exercise, plus Razor, a new Kazakh demolitions expert, Spark, a different lumen technician, and Ghost, a Vorthak stealth specialist whose natural camouflage abilities made her nearly invisible, even in broad daylight. The mission parameters were deceptively simple. Locate and extract 3 high-value intelligence assets from a hostile compound while neutralizing enemy forces and preserving civilian structures. What made it complex was that the hostiles were elite soldiers from the Galactic Defense Force's finest units, equipped with the same advanced weapons and tactics that Elena's team would face in real combat situations. "Remember," Morrison's voice crackled through Elena's comm unit, "your team doesn't know you're human. Command authority has to be earned through competence, not species loyalty." Elena had spent the previous evening studying each team member's service record and psychological profile. Tank was straightforward but appreciated tactical innovation when he could see clear logical benefits. Whisper valued precise coordination and became uncomfortable when plans changed without adequate justification. Razor had a tendency toward excessive enthusiasm that could compromise mission objectives if not properly channeled. Spark processed information differently than Flare, requiring more detailed technical briefings but offering more creative problem-solving approaches. Ghost was the most challenging. Vorthak culture emphasized individual achievement over team coordination, making her naturally resistant to human leadership. As the team moved into position, Elena monitored their progress through helmet cameras and tactical sensors. The enemy had established a sophisticated defensive perimeter with overlapping fields of fire and electronic countermeasures designed to disrupt communication and sensor systems. "Ghost, I need reconnaissance on the northeast approach," Elena transmitted. "Look for sensor gaps and patrol patterns." "Understood, Commander," Ghost replied, her voice carrying the subtle hissing undertones of her species' vocal structure. Elena noted that Ghost used her rank rather than species designation, a positive sign that professional respect was developing. Minutes later, Ghost's report revealed a weakness in the enemy's surveillance grid. Thermal dampening field creates blind spot approximately 12 meters wide. Patrol rotation allows 4-minute window every 23 minutes. Elena quickly calculated the implications. A 4-minute window was enough for a small infiltration team, but not sufficient for the entire unit. She would need to divide her forces and coordinate multiple simultaneous actions. Tank, Razor, I need you to create a diversion at the main gate. Draw attention but do not advance until I give the word. Spark, can you disrupt their communications without alerting them to the interference? Affirmative, Commander. I can create signal degradation that will appear to be equipment malfunction rather than hostile action. Excellent. Whisper, you and Ghost will infiltrate through the northeast gap. I need precise intelligence on internal layout and target locations. Elena paused, reviewing the tactical display one final time. Everyone understand their roles? The chorus of confirmations came in 5 different vocal patterns, but the professional tone was consistent across all species. Elena felt a moment of satisfaction at how quickly the team had coalesced around shared objectives. Despite their cultural differences, the operation unfolded with precision that impressed even the observing instructors. Tank and Razor's diversion was perfectly calibrated, aggressive enough to demand enemy attention, while controlled enough to avoid triggering defensive measures that could compromise the infiltration team. Spark's electronic warfare created confusion in enemy communications that allowed Whisper and Ghost to penetrate the compound's outer perimeter without detection. When Whisper located the first intelligence target, Elena faced a critical decision point. The target was being held in a heavily defended section that would require significant force to breach. But moving the diversion team into assault position would expose them to concentrated enemy fire, and the timeline was becoming compressed as enemy forces began to recognize the coordination behind what had initially appeared to be separate, unrelated attacks. Elena made a choice that demonstrated the kind of tactical thinking the program was designed to identify. Instead of committing her forces to a direct assault, she used the intelligence gathered by Whisper and Ghost to identify the compound's critical infrastructure points. A precisely timed attack on the power grid and communication arrays could create enough confusion to allow extraction of all 3 targets while minimizing casualties on both sides. Change of plan, Elena transmitted to her team. Razor, I need shape charges on these coordinates. The tactical display highlighted 3 structural points that Ghost had identified during her reconnaissance. Spark, when those charges detonate, I need you to override their emergency power systems and create a cascading failure in their defensive grids. Tank's voice carried approval. Smart thinking, Commander. Create chaos, use confusion to achieve objectives without unnecessary fighting. The revised plan required split-second timing and trust between team members who had never worked together before. Elena coordinated the action through careful manipulation of the information flow, ensuring that each team member received exactly the details they needed to execute their portion while maintaining awareness of how their actions fitted into the overall objective. When Razor's charges detonated and Spark's electronic assault disabled the compound's defensive systems, Elena's team moved with coordinated precision that resembled a dance more than a military operation. Whisper and Ghost extracted the 3 targets while Tank provided overwatch and covering fire. Razor cleared escape routes while Spark maintained electronic dominance over enemy communications. The entire operation lasted 18 minutes and resulted in complete mission success with no friendly casualties and minimal collateral damage. More importantly, the enemy forces, seasoned professionals, who understood what they were observing, were impressed enough to request details about Elena's tactical approach for their own training purposes. During the post-exercise debrief, each team member was interviewed separately about their experience working under human command. Their responses, Elena later learned, were uniformly positive and focused on her ability to coordinate complex actions while maintaining clear communication across species barriers. Tank's assessment was particularly significant. Human Commander Vasquez understands warfare not as series of individual actions, but as pattern of coordinated effects. Makes each soldier more effective by showing how individual capabilities contribute to group success. Ghost, despite her species' natural resistance to outside authority, admitted that Elena's leadership style had been unexpectedly effective, and that she would be willing to serve under human command in future operations. That evening, Morrison and Chen joined Elena for a private dinner in the officers' mess. The meal was a celebration of sorts, though Elena suspected it was also a final evaluation session. "You've exceeded every expectation we had for this program," Chen said, as they reviewed the day's tactical recordings. But success in training exercises is one thing. Real command responsibility is something entirely different. Morrison nodded agreement. The question now is whether you're ready for operational deployment. Because if our intelligence about that approaching object is correct, we may need commanders with your capabilities sooner than we originally anticipated. Elena set down her fork and met their gazes steadily. What kind of operational deployment? Chen activated a privacy field and leaned forward. First contact protocols. If that object contains representatives of an extragalactic civilization, humanity may need officers capable of coordinating not just with our current allies, but with entirely unknown species whose capabilities and intentions we can only guess. The weight of that responsibility settled on Elena's shoulders like a physical burden. First contact with an unknown civilization was the kind of assignment that could determine the course of galactic history. Success could establish humanity as a valuable partner in whatever relationship developed. Failure could result in consequences too devastating to contemplate. 3 months later, Elena stood on the bridge of the GDF Harmony, humanity's most advanced starship, watching long-range sensors track the approaching extragalactic object. The vessel around her buzzed with activity as representatives from 12 different species worked together under her command to prepare for what might be the most important first contact in galactic history. The object had revealed itself to be artificial as it drew closer, a massive construct that defied easy categorization. It was part starship, part habitat, part something entirely beyond current understanding. Preliminary scans suggested it housed millions of beings, but the energy signatures were unlike anything in existing databases. Elena's promotion to commander had come with unprecedented responsibilities. She now led the Galactic Defense Force's first integrated command unit, a mixed-species crew selected not for their species' loyalty, but for their ability to work effectively across cultural boundaries. Tank served as her tactical advisor, while Whisper managed reconnaissance operations. Ghost handled intelligence analysis, and a rotation of Lumen technicians maintained their advanced sensor arrays. The past months had tested every skill Elena had developed during her training. Coordinating 12 different species required constant adaptation of communication styles and tactical approaches. What worked with the logical, hierarchical Kazakht would fail completely with the consensus-driven Zephyrians. The energy-based Lumens processed information at speeds that left biological species struggling to keep up, while the methodical crystalline Federation members required extensive deliberation before committing to any course of action. Elena had learned to function as a cultural translator and tactical coordinator simultaneously, finding ways to blend each species' strengths while minimizing the friction points that arose from their different approaches to problem-solving. More importantly, she had earned genuine respect from crew members who had initially viewed human command with skepticism. "Commander, the object is responding to our communication attempts," reported Lieutenant Harmony, the ship's Vorthak communications specialist. "But the signal structure is unlike anything in our linguistic databases." Elena moved to the communications station and studied the incoming transmissions. The patterns were clearly artificial, but they operated on principles that seemed to incorporate elements from multiple sensory modalities simultaneously. "Can we isolate component frequencies and attempt pattern matching?" "Working on it," Harmony replied. Her natural camouflage abilities made her excellent at detecting subtle patterns that other species might miss. There appeared to be harmonic relationships between different signal components, but the mathematical structure is unusual. Elena called up the linguistic analysis on her command display and found herself looking at something that challenged conventional understanding of communication systems. The signals contained visual, auditory, and electromagnetic components that seemed to be integrated in ways that suggested the senders perceived reality through multiple sensory channels simultaneously. "Commander," Tank's deep voice carried unusual uncertainty. "Tactical analysis suggests the object possesses defensive capabilities that exceed our current understanding. If they prove hostile, conventional military responses may be insufficient." Elena had been reviewing the same data and reaching similar conclusions. The object's energy output alone suggested technological capabilities centuries beyond current galactic standards. Any species capable of building something that massive and moving it between galaxies would view current galactic military forces as barely more advanced than primitive warriors with sharp sticks. The key is not to appear threatening while demonstrating our capabilities, Elena decided. We need to show that we're sophisticated enough to be worth communicating with, but not aggressive enough to be considered a threat. She activated the ship's general communication system, addressing the entire crew. All stations prepare for extended first contact protocols. This may take considerable time, and we need to be ready for anything they might show us. Hours passed as the two sides exchanged increasingly complex signals. Elena's crew worked together, with a coordination that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. The Lumen technicians processed signal components at superhuman speeds, while Thrix pattern analysts identified structural relationships. Kazakh tactical specialists monitored for any signs of hostile intent, while Vorthak linguists attempted to construct translation matrices. Gradually, a rudimentary communication system emerged. The extragalactic visitors called themselves the Synthesis, a civilization that had evolved from the merger of multiple species across their home galaxy. They had spent millennia traveling between galaxies, seeking other civilizations capable of the kind of species integration that they had achieved. Elena felt a chill of recognition as she realized the implications. The Synthesis weren't invaders or explorers in any conventional sense. They were evaluators, searching for civilizations that had evolved beyond single-species limitations. The recent formation of mixed-species military units and Elena's own role as a human commanding aliens might not have been coincidental timing. "They've been watching us," Elena murmured to Morrison, who had arrived aboard the Harmony to observe the contact proceedings. The Gray Badge program, the integrated units, the whole push toward species cooperation. They've been influencing our development. Morrison nodded grimly. Our xenopsychologists reached the same conclusion. The question is whether we've passed their evaluation or whether this is some kind of final test. The answer came in the form of an invitation. The Synthesis requested that Elena and a small delegation board their construct to participate in what they called a demonstration of synthesis potential. The invitation was specifically addressed to Elena by name, despite the fact that no formal introductions had been made. Elena chose her delegation carefully. Tank and Whisper represented the successful integration she had achieved with warrior species. Spark provided Lumen technological expertise, while Ghost offered Vorthak analytical capabilities. Most importantly, she included Marcus Chen, her former training partner who had developed into an excellent tactical coordinator in his own right. The Synthesis construct was beyond anything Elena had imagined. Vast chambers contained ecosystems from dozens of different worlds, while beings that appeared to be merged combinations of multiple species worked together on projects that spanned technologies, arts, and sciences. The boundaries between individual species had blurred into something entirely new. Their hosts were even more remarkable. The Synthesis beings appeared to be living examples of successful species integration, individuals who possessed the best characteristics of multiple evolutionary paths while transcending the limitations of any single biological heritage. They moved with Kazakh strength, processed information with lumen speed, and demonstrated perception abilities that surpassed any known species. Your galaxy shows promise, their spokesperson explained through communication methods that bypassed language entirely, transmitting concepts directly into Elena's consciousness. Few civilizations achieve meaningful species integration. Most remain locked in competition until they destroy themselves or stagnate into irrelevance. Elena found herself speaking for not just humanity, but for all the species she had learned to understand and coordinate. We're still learning how to work together effectively, but we're committed to finding ways to combine our different strengths. The Synthesis being gestured toward a vast observation chamber where representatives from Elena's crew were interacting with Synthesis counterparts. Tank was engaged in what appeared to be a tactical discussion with a being that combined Kazakh physicality with additional sensory capabilities. Whisper was examining technological displays with entities that possessed her analytical abilities enhanced by exotic sensory organs. Integration is not absorption, the spokesperson continued. Each contributing species must maintain its essential nature while transcending its limitations. This is the path to true civilization advancement. Over the following hours, Elena participated in exchanges that challenged every assumption she had held about species cooperation and military effectiveness. The synthesis had developed tactics and strategies that incorporated capabilities from hundreds of different evolutionary paths, creating approaches to problem-solving that no single species could have imagined. When the delegation returned to the Harmony, Elena carried with her an understanding that would reshape humanity's role in galactic civilization. The synthesis had offered to establish a permanent exchange program, sharing advanced technologies and techniques in return for continued access to observe the galaxy's integration experiments. More importantly, they had specifically requested that Elena continue her work developing cross-species coordination capabilities. The quiet girl who had entered military training with a gray badge had become humanity's most valuable asset in establishing relationships with the most advanced civilization the galaxy had ever encountered. As Elena stood on the bridge watching the synthesis construct prepare for its next intergalactic journey, she reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. Morrison had been right when he said that. Elena and a small delegation board their construct to participate in what they called a demonstration of synthesis potential. The invitation was specifically addressed to Elena by name. Despite the fact that no formal introductions had been made, Elena chose her delegation carefully. Tank and Whisper represented the successful integration she had achieved with warrior species. Spark provided Lumen technological expertise, while Ghost offered Vorthak analytical capabilities. Most importantly, she included Marcus Chen, her former training partner who had developed into an excellent tactical coordinator in his own right. The synthesis construct was beyond anything Elena had imagined. Vast chambers contained ecosystems from dozens of different worlds, while beings that appeared to be merged combinations of multiple species worked together on projects that spanned technologies, arts, and sciences. The boundaries between individual species had blurred into something entirely new. Their hosts were even more remarkable. The synthesis beings appeared to be living examples of successful species integration, individuals who possessed the best characteristics of multiple evolutionary paths while transcending the limitations of any single biological heritage. They moved with Kazakh strength, processed information with lumen speed, and demonstrated perception abilities that surpassed any known species. "Your galaxy shows promise," their spokesperson explained through communication methods that bypassed language entirely, transmitting concepts directly into Elena's consciousness. "Few civilizations achieve meaningful species integration. Most remain locked in competition until they destroy themselves or stagnate into irrelevance." Elena found herself speaking for not just humanity but for all the species she had learned to understand and coordinate. "We're still learning how to work together effectively, but we're committed to finding ways to combine our different strengths." The synthesis being gestured toward a vast observation chamber where representatives from Elena's crew were interacting with synthesis counterparts. Tank was engaged in what appeared to be a tactical discussion with a being that combined Kazakh physicality with additional sensory capabilities. Whisper was examining technological displays with entities that possessed her analytical abilities, enhanced by exotic sensory organs. "Integration is not absorption," the spokesperson continued. "Each contributing species must maintain its essential nature while transcending its limitations. This is the path to true civilization advancement." Over the following hours, Elena participated in exchanges that challenged every assumption she had held about species cooperation and military effectiveness. The synthesis had developed tactics and strategies that incorporated capabilities from hundreds of different evolutionary paths, creating approaches to problem-solving that no single species could have imagined. When the delegation returned to the Harmony, Elena carried with her an understanding that would reshape humanity's role in galactic civilization. The synthesis had offered to establish a permanent exchange program, sharing advanced technologies and techniques in return for continued access to observe the galaxy's integration experiments. More importantly, they had specifically requested that Elena continue her work developing cross-species coordination capabilities. The quiet girl who had entered military training with a gray badge had become humanity's most valuable asset in establishing relationships with the most advanced civilization the galaxy had ever encountered. As Elena stood on the bridge watching the synthesis construct prepare for its next intergalactic journey, she reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. Morrison had been right when he said that her test results were too unusual to categorize. She had become something entirely new, a human being capable of thinking beyond species boundaries while remaining fundamentally human. The galaxy was changing, and Elena would be at the center of that transformation. But for the first time since her recruitment, she felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The Quiet One had found her voice, and the galaxy was listening,